It seems like every time this woman opens her mouth, she always manages to find a way to put her foot even further and further and further down her throat. So, as y'all know, I just recently did a triple P on Candace Owens and by proxy her husband, George Farmer, and the fact that this man, this interior designer by the name of David Neto, was not going to design her home because, let's face it, he has integrity and she and probably her husband do not. And what I'm about to read to y'all is exactly why, or one of the reasons why, this David Neto is not working with her. So Candace was on her show via the Daily Wire, where she said, or she claimed, that transgenderism is worse than Jim Crow laws and said segregation doesn't harm children. Yes, she actually said that. Again, another bad comparison and another bad take. And the thing is, when I'm looked at the comment section, people literally, I think she's losing her grip even more and more every day. People are growing more and more tired of her. Beyond just black people either are going to, there's only a couple of spectrums black people are going to fall into when it was with Candace. Either they sort of like her, they don't like her, or they loathe her. I don't really know a lot of black people that quote unquote love her, at least genuinely. And many black people are going to fall into the category I do, and that is I loathe her. But white people, the people that she's catering to, are falling more and more into that loathe category as well. But she has to keep up appearances in order to keep those checks running in. After all, the interior designer, David Neto, was a white guy, and the fact that he sent that email lets you know he falls into that loathe and scathing category too. But let me go ahead and see what they're talking about in this article. The Daily Wire's Candace Owens made a stunning comparison, but more like a false comparison, between Jim Crow laws that enforced segregation and the modern day transgender movement. The conversation occurred on the Thursday edition of her self-titled podcast, Candace Owens. A clip from the episode began to circulate via Jason Campbell on Twitter. Owens, who made the comments on the Thursday edition of her podcast, which was picked up by Jason Campbell on Twitter, largely focused her episode on transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney, who has faced backlash over sponsorships with brands like Bud Light and Nike. Now, if y'all don't know who this Dylan Mulvaney is a person, of course, who is trans, biologically born, a man who now has quote-unquote transitioned into a woman, well, trans woman. And they basically are getting all these sponsorship deals out of the air for whatever reason. I would highly suggest, if you want to know more about that, just go over to the Amazing Lucas's channel, because he has done, I believe, 2 videos talking about that. And he's probably the only person I can think of that I follow who actually has talked about this. So if you want more information about that, go and check that out. It's some very interesting details behind that. But let's get back into this article. Which brings me to the greatest civil rights violation of our time, which is taking place right now, and that is transgenderism, Owens said. And I'm going to make a very strong statement right now, and I mean it. This is her putting her foot down moment. It is worse than Jim Crow laws because we are mutilating the bodies of children. No. Again, false comparison. You can't say that Jim Crow laws that pretty much, like the article stated before, forced segregation between 2 groups of people, and that heavily went against black people in particular, and say that that this was going on now with the trans community is worse. They're not even mutually the same, because that group can still live amongst society. They're not separated and shunned into just their own little enclaves. Now, they can choose to go into their enclaves, which a lot of them do, but they're not pushed and forced there. Because I don't see a trans-only water fountain. I don't see a trans-only section of a restaurant. I don't see a trans-only part of the theater where they have to sit in the back, or they have to sit in the back of the bus. No. So for her to say that, again, false comparison, but she falls into the category of a lot of people who have that mindset, who always have these false comparisons. How could you not see that as something worse? If you segregated white people versus black people, you wouldn't be harming children, and we are doing that. And once again, the same usual suspects are supporting the mainstream media, Owens said. Owens says mainstream media are describing trans rights as compassionate. Look around you. The New York Times, the Washington Post, they are fostering this delusion. They're saying it's compassionate to allow your child to pick their gender, Owens said. The science is in, guys. It's totally fine to allow children to take drugs that chemically castrate them, that render them infertile for the rest of their lives. It's good for their mental psyche, she added. Owens said doctors and surgeons are performing these procedures to mutilate the bodies of our most vulnerable, comparing the process to Frankenstein. These are human experiments that are being performed on children, Owens concluded. Now, here's the thing. Initially, what she's saying, she has a little bit of a leg to stand on as far as what they're doing, as far as, with kids and everything like that. Because I have said on my channel time and time again that this is wrong, especially when it comes to D. Wade and the high priestess which he married and what they did to that child. However, where she messed up royally, that completely is going to make people look at her talking point in a different way, is by comparing them or saying that they're worse than Jim Crow laws, when these are two entirely different things. It's the fact that Candace Owens, while she was trying to make a point, she had to throw something that affected heavily and marginally onto black people, and then throw in how this is worse than that. That is the problem. If she would have left out talking about Jim Crow at all in her talking points, nobody would have disagreed with her. But she had to throw Jim Crow in there, which we know, of course, it affected mainly black people, in order to make a talking point. And you know why that is? And you know why it was so easy for her to do? Because it didn't affect her lineage. So that's why it was so easy for her to do. Her family, as far as I know, wasn't affected by Jim Crow. Mine was. My grandmother, my dad. I've told you the story about what happened with my mother when she was in school. Can Candace say the same thing about her grandparents? Or her parents? Probably not. That's why it was so easy for her to bring that up. Again, if Candace would have just focused on the transgender part with the kids and how that's affecting them and why she doesn't agree with it, okay, fine. But when she inserted how this is worse than Jim Crow laws when they're not even mutually the same, that's where the problem kicks in. She, like I said, this woman always finds a way to put her foot in her mouth. I think she's run out of room. Like, at this point, her foot is coming out of her ass. And she's walking look like a 3-legged tripod. But yeah, the thing about it is, though, is that Candace is not the only person that would probably say something like that. She's probably one of the few that would, because like I said, I looked at the comment section. This article that I'm reading from has 652 comments, and I read some of them, and all of them are just basically saying that this woman needs to go sit down somewhere. And most of the people that's commenting are the ones whose asses she loves to kiss every single day. But like I said, she has this syndrome of being the quote unquote smartest Negro in the room, and thinks that anything that comes out of her mouth, because she says it so eloquently and with such demurity in her tone, that she's somehow the smartest person in the room, that she has the highest intelligence, that she, has all of this intellect that we as other black people somehow lack. But like I said, they are getting tired of her. But she's going to end up, she's going to hang her own self out to dry. And I told people before, her wake-up call is going to come from the very people who ask that she kiss all the time. Look at what happened with the interior designer. That's one right there. And she tried to slick and say that it was racism. But see, the thing is, she's already come out and said that racism, in so many words, doesn't exist. So, I mean, if it doesn't exist to you, it don't exist to us. We turn a blind eye to you, like you turn a blind eye to pretty much every plight that black people have dealt with in this establishment in the last few years. So at this point, she's just babbling. She's just talking for the sake of hearing herself talk. And it's honestly played out, boring, and very unseasoned.